In this lesson, we're going to learn about shadows inside of 3ds Max. So here's where we left off in our last lesson, and you'll notice that in our scene, our teapot and our sphere is not casting a shadow on our table. And if we do a quick render of this, just hitting our quick render button, you'll notice that there are no shadows being displayed. So it kind of looks like our sphere and our teapot could actually be floating on top of our table here. So let's go ahead and discuss how we can actually create casted shadows. So to do this, it's pretty simple. We just select our light source, and what we need to do is actually check this shadows on, and this will actually create casted shadows. So now you can see a casted shadow on our teapot and on our table here. And you'll notice that in our realistic view, we can actually see this. So if you're in any other view, let's say for example you're on, let's say shaded, you won't be able to see those shadows generated. So let's go back to realistic, and you can see that in your viewport. Now if you need to be able to see just a little more accurate version of this scene, you can actually do another quick render and see that as well. But this is still pretty close to what's inside of our realistic viewport. So let's go ahead and close this. And what we want to do now is I want to just kind of discuss a couple of the different shadow types that we have available to us. So let's select our light source. And by default, 3ds Max will use shadow maps on standard spotlights and standard omni lights. Okay? So it's going to use what's called shadow map. And a shadow map is essentially a bitmap that has been generated kind of like a texture on a piece of geometry. So like this table here. And you'll notice that these shadows are very soft on the edges. Okay? Now shadow map is really is less accurate than ray trace shadows, which we'll talk about in just a second. But shadow maps require less calculation during the rendering process, so that's how this could be helpful to you. Now, the other type of shadow that we talked about is ray trace shadows, and these are really the only two we're going to talk about for right now. If you want to learn more about those types of shadows, you could really look into our lighting, Introduction to Lighting in 3ds Max. So let's switch this over to ray trace shadows, and if we just click in our viewport, you'll see that this updates, and you'll see that this shadow is a little bit harder around the edges than our shadow map. So let's go ahead and do a quick render of this just to see this a little bit better, and you can definitely see that this shadow is very, very hard here. Okay? Now, based on the shadow itself, you'll see that this is very black and very dense. And sometimes, well, really, shadows aren't really that dense unless there's only a single light source in the scene. So we can kind of fake this out, that light is bouncing off of other surfaces to really light up these shadows here. So to do that, we need to make sure that we're actually controlling some of our shadow parameters just as much as we are controlling our light parameters. So let's go to our shadow parameters here, and let's just expand that. And here we can see a couple of different options. First, we can actually change the color of our casted shadows. So instead of being this black color, you could do red or green or whatever. But this will only change the color of the casted shadows. Okay? It won't actually change the shading that is on the back side of this polygon or on the back side of this sphere. So let me show you what I mean by that. Let's just click on this color swatch and switch this over to red, and you'll see that we still have this black shadow on our teapot and on our sphere, but our casted shadows have turned red here. Okay? So you want to be careful when using that. So let's scroll back down, and let's go to black and hit OK. And we want to be able to change our density of our shadows sometimes. So let's say we don't want this to be quite that black. Let's say we want to simulate light bouncing off of other surfaces and lighting up these casted shadows a little bit. So let's take this down, and let's go down to like 0.5. And you'll see how this changes the density on your shadows. Now, you'll also notice some inconsistencies with the shading on your object and the casted shadows, so this is something that you want to watch out for. So to basically take care of this problem, what you would actually have to do is create another light source to light up this side of your teapot. So if you get some inconsistencies like this, you might want to go ahead and just add another light source. So what we can do, let's take our density back to 1. So let's just type that in. And let me just show you how we can bring in another light source and really help with our shading on our geometry. So I'm just going to switch to my top view, and let's go to our Create panel, and we're going to use an OmniLight. And remember, our OmniLight is a spherical type shape, so it's going to basically emit light in all directions. So let's click on this and create this OmniLight in here. And what we're going to do is go to our front view and just pull this OmniLight up. Now you'll see that this really washes out our scene here. It looks very, very bright. Let's go ahead and do a quick render on this. And let's actually click in our perspective view and then hit quick render. You'll see that this is very, very bright. It's almost as if maybe it's an alien abduction or something like that. So let's close this out and let's adjust that multiplier on this light. So we'll go to our modify panel and we'll go to our intensity, color, and attenuation, and let's just take this multiplier down. Now what we're doing here is we are actually using this OmniLight as a fill light. So we have our main light, which is our target light here, and then we're using our OmniLight as fill to kind of take all the tension out of this shading, okay, to make this a little more realistic. Now once we've done that, we've got a nice shading on this front side of our teapot here. Let's go ahead and go back to our target light, and now we can adjust that density to really match the rest of our shading on our geometry. So now let's hit quick render, and let's make sure that we're in our perspective view to do that. So we'll hit quick render one more time, and now we're a little more consistent with our shadows that are on our geometry as well as our casted shadows. So working with shadows is just as important as working with lights themselves. Okay? Alright, so that wraps up for this lesson on our shading. So in our next lesson, we're going to finish this off by adding some materials to our geometry and getting this ready for a render.